Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We're sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which offers innovative and compassionate care on Rolling Bay. They also have day stay and respite programs. To learn more, to schedule a tour, or just to talk to them, call 360-689-4314. Also, I want to begin by acknowledging that the Senior Community Center is on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people, our neighbors, the Suquamish tribe. We are grateful for their hospitality and we honor them, the people of the clear salt water. Today, our conversation is about death, which has a variety of reactions in a variety of cultures, everything from not talking about it to holding a vigil by candlelight to celebrating somebody's life with a lively wake. And we have some experts on hand, a couple of hospice experts, Don Tarbutton, and we also have Rick Freeman here, and to coordinate the conversation, as she often does, Ann Lovejoy.
Thank you, Reed. Yeah, we are very honored to have both of you guys here today because Don, many of you may remember, was the director of the Kitsap Hospice for quite a few years. And both of you have experience as hospice chaplains. And in those capacities, you've certainly seen quite a lot of the great variety of ways that people handle the death and dying of somebody close to them. And, you know, Don, I think you kind of have something you would like to read to us to get us started. Is that right?
Yes, and I'll apologize to all of you as I did to Anne recently. I need to read from my presentations because I can't trust my memory any longer at age 86. So good morning, everyone. I want to share a conversation that I had with a friend whose father was from Thailand, where she was born. So it concerned her father's death and his expectations for his future after his death, as well as his wife's expectations for her future, given her previous association with him. First off, the conversation reflected the fact that Thailand is a 98% Buddhist country. So in comparatively low emotional conversations with his family, at first he acknowledged that he really didn't want to die. However, as he became closer to dying, he seemed pleasantly relieved due to the fact that he'd been experiencing quite a lot of discomfort from a large tumor in his throat and the surgery and radiation and stuff that went with that. So when treatments were suspended, his life became just revolving around eating and dying. It was viewed not as a tragedy, but rather that he could look forward to having a second life in the future. Monks chanted him to his destination. While his first wife had held some strong feelings about her difficult relationship with her husband, her then husband, she decided that she didn't want to take revenge on him during this life because she didn't want to come back in the future and have to resolve previous conflict. So they had also been able to develop a really reasonably good relationship with one another since their divorce. My friend described a movie that she'd been to on one of her visits to her family in Thailand based on past lives, encouraging people to resolve issues with each other before they died. There's an acceptance of dying and death through photos that are taken of people while they're dying, and we don't normally do that in our country. There's a belief that the same people have been hanging out together for millennia. So I think that you could say that Thai culture around death looks beyond the present and into the future with its assumption that a death now is not the end of life. So just out of curiosity, are there people here today who believe that you may have a really good chance of another life in the future? And if so, are there ways that you're preparing for that possibility?
Anybody want to take that one? I have to say, I've known a lot of people who are definitely very clear in their minds that reincarnation is real. And I can say that I've actually seen a few things that made me think that maybe that was so. And I think it's a it can be either a very expansive way to look at things or a very restricting one, depending on how you take it, I suppose. Like, I'm doomed to keep repeating this till I get it right, or whoopee, I get another chance, right? Um, my grandson asked me a few years ago, actually, he'd seen something that made him think this, and he said, Granny, when you die, would you come back as a cat so I'll know it's you? So I said, sure. We had a great conversation about what kind of cat he wanted me to turn into. But I kind of love that childlike assumption that maybe we do have that option. You could come back and say hello and curl around somebody's ankles a few times to, to let them know you're still caring about them. Anybody else want to jump in? How about you, Rick?
Well, for me, it's given. So that life is an ongoing event, and that I was alive before I came here, and I'm alive here now in this realm of consciousness, and I will be alive when I go beyond here. It'll just be a different expression of it. So that's my my lived experience and journey.
I'm curious about, I mean, to me, as a lifelong gardener and someone who's absolutely a dedicated composter, like nothing's ever wasted, right? And you look at all the natural cycles and the way things get, things that are garbage turn into garden gold and become nutritive and rich. It makes me wonder about our spirit, whether we don't have a similar process, that we get refined a little bit in breaking down and coming back in a different way to be of more use, right? Of more service. But thinking about one thing I've remembered getting a lot of questions about when we did a previous program a few years ago before the pandemic, we did this umbrella program called Talking About Death Won't Kill You. And I know you both were part of that. And there were a lot of questions about things like vigiling, like how do you do a vigil if it's not part of your tradition, but you like the idea? Have you seen ways that people have brought that tradition to life in their own family or relationships?
Are you talking about a vigil after death before burial, or a wake, or?
Well, I guess, I've seen people sitting with someone who is dying and calling that a vigil. And I've seen people holding vigil after someone dies. And I thought both of those seem to be different kinds of traditions for different cultures. And by culture, I mean, there's a dominant culture in this country, and there are many, many, many smaller ones, different religions, different ethnic groups, different family traditions. And so both words like vigil and wake seem to have a lot of definitions we could use. But I think vigiling for me was very comforting when both when my parents died, and my mother particularly, who had a more prolonged, she spent a lot of time on the runway. So we had a lot of time to get ready. And then I really liked, and my family liked, having candles and sitting with her in that process. But for others, I know it's something that happens more after someone has died, when maybe the family's gathering or you're waiting for the undertaker to come to maybe have candles and some quiet time together. Is that something you've seen a fair amount of, or?
Oh yeah, there's so many variations on the theme, because every person is an individual. Every person's going to come to the situation as an individual, and then you have many different forms of what you could call culture. You have the small immediate family unit, you have extended families, you have families of choice, you have very special friends that are part of the vigil quite often. And then you have the religious influence. For many people, religion is important to them. And there you have so many variations on the theme. And some of those break down when you go through the emotional process leading up to the end of life. And they break down in the sense that their importance can shift, can change. And that's why it's important, I found, to remain open to the possibilities of what might arise as an organic response to what's happening. And we see that in many ways. I'll give you an example. There was a patient I had. I would visit her in a nursing home when I was doing hospice chaplain work. And she was Buddhist and spoke no English. But her daughter introduced us and explained to her that I felt very confident that I could sit with her and honor the Buddhist tradition from which she came. And we spent several hours together over time, and we never really communicated, but we sat together in the spaciousness of life. And when it came time to have her memorial, I was invited to be a part of it, not to lead it, but to be a part of it, because the family had come to know me as somebody who joined them on their vigil up to that point. But they had a very formal Buddhist gathering with monks who led the ceremony, and the family participated in the cremation process. I bore witness to that with them. So here we are, someone who's very much Buddhist with a family that's broader than that, for whom they had encountered somebody else who comes from an interfaith perspective, who they invited to be a part of their gathering. So I'm sure they didn't expect that when we started, but that's what came out of that journey. So that's an example how things can just organically become what's important to the family and to the people left here to celebrate the life of the loved one.
I know that I've heard a number of people say, well, I don't want to do it wrong. Like, I don't want to do the wrong thing, as if there was a set way. Don, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Well, there really isn't, of course, a set way, as illustrated by what I just said previously. But I lived in a co-op community, a eco village in Portland, and one of the things that we did while I was there, that when we found out, for example, that you talked about a few minutes ago, that it's okay to keep a body up to 3 days if you keep it cool. So we made provision for ice if that was necessary to do that, and we had a separate building called a farmhouse where there was a living room where the body could be laid out and iced if necessary. And we understood and knew that we had 3 days in which people could come and pay their respects, and it seemed to work out pretty well.
And in that community, didn't you tell me once that you have friends who have made a shroud for you?
Yes, I actually decided that I wanted to participate in my own funeral, funeral, I guess you could call it. So friends in the community and I organized a presentation to the community that included me as being there still alive. And it was a wonderful event. Several people, including Rick, facilitated and spoke about their experience of living with, knowing me over time and that kind of stuff. So it was interesting, and I enjoyed participating in my own memorial service before I died.
That inspired my family, that story. When I told my grandkids, they got really intrigued and decided that they and their mom are going to make a shroud for me, and they've been picking fabric ever since. Oh, Granny, this would be a nice one.
Of course, one woman who raised her hand, she said, well, should I start? Oh, a few days or weeks afterwards, a woman came up to me. She said, Don, do you think I should start getting your shroud made now? And I said, well, you don't need to start right away. You can do that when you get around to it.
But I think that's kind of a wonderful way for a family to look ahead together and say, this is coming. We're all very interested in green burial. And here on Bainbridge, we have Cook family has purchased Hilltops Cemetery, which is designated as a green burial, which means instead of caskets and things like that, you could be just in your shroud. And then one of my friends who was buried like that was buried it was summertime, and the family had big, huge dahlia beds. So she was buried in layers of dahlias as well as her shroud, which I thought was really wonderful. But I like the idea of thinking ahead that way. And we as a family are choosing a plot where there's room for everybody, right, down the road. And then you can pick your tree, have your tree planted that you would nourish as you rot down into the earth. I think that's a beautiful image. And, and I love that this kind of thought is a little more acceptable these days, that more people are saying, wow, maybe I want to do something a little more earth friendly with my last gift to the planet should be the return of my bones, right?
Mhm. I
So
think Chris had his hand up.
oh, good. Go, Chris.
So before this, we lived in South Texas, which had a very large Mexican American population. So very, very religious. But we found as people that we knew there passed away, one of the most popular things to have in a non-religious space, they had these, for all intents and purposes, it looked like a church, but it had no religious artifacts anywhere. And these were celebrations. And they just invited people to come. There was no music. There a couple people talked, but it was really to come there and to celebrate them. And then there would be a big potluck afterward. It was just a wonderful thing. And I was really surprised growing up in the Roman Catholic Church myself, where there are so many hard and fast rules, that this was becoming acceptable down there. But we loved it. It wasn't sad. Everything was up, positive. It was a celebration of the life and not what I would consider, I guess it technically is a vigil, but vigil to me sounds religious and subdued as opposed to a celebration of that person's life.
Yeah, and I think wake in many cultures has a little more of that vibrant association. Would you say that, Rick?
Yeah, Wake's history came from the time when a formal vigil over the body until it was buried. It was never left alone. And then it's evolved in time to different applications, different uses. My mom was somebody who used that term all the time for everybody around her that was going to have a funeral celebration of any kind. It was a wake. We're going to have her wake here. We're going to have his wake there. And she called her own, she made her own preparations before she died, full list of everyone who was going to be invited. She wanted to buy the first drink for everybody who came to the Elks Club for her celebration. And it was all planned out ahead of time, the menu, the whole bit. And so, the wake for her was her way of saying, let's celebrate this life. And at the time, she didn't know that, she didn't have a sense of what was going to happen afterwards. But when she came to her own end of life process, she lived with me and we talked about it quite a bit in the evenings between game shows she was watching on TV. And she came to have a different outlook on what she expected would be coming. And it made her all the more excited about her wake and her journey going forward. So again, things evolve as we go along. And for me, vigil, I witnessed so many of those in the hospital setting as well as hospice, where people are just companioning their loved one. It's not a formal religious thing necessarily for many of them. It's just that their heart is with that person and they don't want them to be alone. And it's, I've seen them go on for 24 hours a day for 7 days a week until one person leaves in the middle of the night because they have to go to the bathroom. They can't stay in there any longer. And then the person would die in that moment because they didn't want anyone there when they left. So in a way, you have to consider that the one who's going through the death process can also have an impact on the journey of a vigil and what you'll end up talking about at the wake.
Don, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I'd like to sort of bring up another topic that I was going to talk about, and that's that you may remember, or maybe you knew that the Art Museum just closed an exhibition that they've been having which reflected the Mexican Day of the Dead, ofrenda, the altar. I also wanted to mention the Trans Day of Remembrance, Gratitude, and Sorrow that's coming up that people can still participate in.
Oh boy, and those are two really different, aren't they?
They are, yeah, right. So the Day of the Dead, or Dia de los Muertos, is in fact a traditional Mexican holiday, which was celebrated on November 2nd. And on this day, it's believed that the souls of the dead return to visit their living family members. Many participate in this day by visiting the graves of deceased loved ones, decorating them with marigolds and other flowers, and setting up altars with their favorite foods, drinks, photos. And as a child, I had the great good fortune to be invited to the home of some Mexican families, or a Mexican family that lived near my grandparents' ranch in Texas, where they celebrated the Day of the Dead. And I'll never forget the women in the family had created an altar in the home. And I can always picture them as they processed on their knees up a dirt driveway to pray at the altar. It was really a moving event.
Wow. Wow.
Locally, I hope you took the opportunity to engage with the ofrenda as that was created for the Day of the Dead at the Art Museum. The museum actually included or provided an opportunity for us at the Senior Center where we could make candles with photos on them of the deceased person. And I made one, including a photo of my former partner, Steve, who died in 1995 of AIDS. The altar itself was a beautiful work of art. You may remember seeing it on, I guess it goes this way, in the bulletin that comes out, or pamphlet that comes out from the museum. How many of you saw this event, this wonderful offering? It was just really lovely. Yeah.
I actually got to help with that kind of accidentally. Every year I usually bring material to make the pathway outside the museum. They have a big long floral path, and there's one person who always kind of did it. Well, this year when I brought the material, she said, okay, you do it. And I thought, oh, okay. But I just went behind the museum and picked a whole lot more stuff out of the bushes. And then every time I saw someone I knew go by, I asked them to help. And we had been donated all kinds of hydrangeas and flowers and branches of different things. And so we together, we got about 15 people all together helping to make this kind of wonderful wedge-shaped entryway of flowers and plants and dying leaves and all kinds of wonderful things woven together, which I thought was a great community welcome.
Yeah.
But yeah, that ofrenda is so beautiful. And they had the Children's Museum up just above the Art Museum had a special program that morning for the children. They dressed as butterflies, and they all came down from the museum following a mariachi group,
Sweet.
a family from the Paulsbo Bakery who had baked all the special bread, the pane de
Right.
muertos. And here came all these children singing and with their little fluttery wings. It was adorable.
Well, if I read the fine print around this photo, and it was actually created by third grade students in Suquamish with the leadership of their teacher. The students actually created this photo. So in the future, one other thing that's coming up that you may already know about is that on Sunday, the 20th at 4 o'clock, there will be an event arranged by Yves Palais to welcome the spirits who experienced so little welcome in their lives. It'll be held in the auditorium of the museum by a partnership between the Bainbridge Pride, Rainbow Crew Northwest, the Bainbridge Island North Kitsap Interfaith Council, Trans Friending, and our own queer elders group. There'll be a panel discussion on holding simultaneous feelings of gratitude and sorrow for the lives of trans people who were murdered for no other reason than being trans. As participants arrive they can accept a card with the name of a deceased person if they wish, how and where the person was murdered. And then later on, there'll be an opportunity to read from the card to conclude the event honoring these deceased wonderful people. So I encourage as many of you as possible to participate in this annual event if you have the time to do that. Has anyone participated in these in the future, in the past? Because they've been held for a number of years. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I don't know if all of you realize my daughter is transgender. And some years ago, when she came out at age 35, I had a lot to learn, I'll tell you. But we started a group called Transfriending, and we has started participating in it's called TDOR, or Trans Day of Remembrance, in that years ago. And one thing that's so moving is these are forgotten people. And when you walk up on the stage and read a card, you may not really know that person, but you realize I'm remembering you, I'm saying your name. And one thing we like to do in my family is like bring a card home. And when we have a holiday for the next year, put a chair and a plate and a candle, and then put the name card on that plate with the candle and say, we're bringing you with us. It's pretty sweet. This year we had a particularly poignant, tragic memory because a dear family friend, a 14-year-old transgender boy from LA who spent summers here for many years, committed suicide just shortly before Halloween. And for my grandchildren, being able to use the ofrenda to make candles, we did that together, cut up one of the trans flags and some head pictures, and they glued on rainbow goldfish crackers, which was Mara's favorite food, and made a little bowl of it for him. And to be able to offer their candles and flowers and the goldfish crackers was a sweet way for them to be able to participate without kind of the drama and trauma of a bigger event that might have been really a lot for them as small young people. But yeah, those, being able to offer something that way, I think, can be very healing. Yeah.
Okay.
Chris.
So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So this was great Sunday. Now that I'm retired and I substitute in places that liturgy is doesn't flow well with me. I'm Episcopal, so sometimes the liturgy doesn't always. I don't know what's happening sometimes. Well, anyway, I was at Bethany Lutheran this past Sunday, substituting there, and I was caught by surprise that they had this day of remembrance. It wasn't in the order that I had, and I'm like, okay, what are they doing? And am I involved? No, I wasn't. But I just kind of took a sigh and went, oh, I get to watch this, and it was really moving. It was everything that Eve announced on Friday. I was like, what is this? And then I got to experience it at Bethany. It was very moving. They lit the candles. The ministers said the names, and it was really just so moving. It really touched me, and I thought, oh wow, this is my first experience with this. And then I was introduced Friday with this subject, and then Sunday I got to participate in it in some way. It was nice, and you talked about the names. They listed the names and lit the candles. It was very moving. I did remember one name. It was so remarkable. Feather Fern. Some of the names I couldn't pronounce that if I tried, but this one was like, oh, I can remember that one. Anyway, it was a great experience.
And we did go, both of us went to a friend of ours who's a docent over in Seattle told us that Bainbridge Island Museum, which we had never been to, had that presentation on transgender people who had been killed, and the fabric and how that was when you step back and looked at it from a distance and then you looked at it up close and they told their stories. We went to the museum for the first time to see that exhibit. So it's something new in our lives, but welcome new.
And that's an example of a community vigil, something not put together by a single person. But of course, there was an artist in that particular exhibit behind that. But something that everyone can come to and find some place for reflection in themselves, in what they're observing, what they're experiencing, and in reading about the lives of other people. I think that's another form of cultural remembrance.
If anyone's interested in getting some names, I can bring some name cards to the senior center and leave them at the front desk, and you could ask for one and invite them to your table through the holidays if you wanted to do that. I think that's just a beautiful way to hold people.
I'm curious if any of I see a bunch of names here, see a couple of wonderful faces that I recognize, but I wonder if anyone here has anything they can share with us about a way they have celebrated life and end of life with for somebody.
Anybody want to step up and to that one?
No.
I will, only because this goes along with what, Rick had mentioned, yeah. As far as like a person leaving to go to the bathroom, like literally 45 seconds, and then the person dies at that point. David lost his mom a year ago, and so there's a lot of communication going on at the time. COVID had hit the assisted living facility she was in. All of the staff had gone home. They had the director and one other person caring for the entire place. So things were just in shambles. And his family had been in contact with the people there for a long time. She was there for a while. And even though there were COVID rules in place, they allowed him to come in and go to her room and spend time with her. She did test positive for COVID. We're not sure that that's what she died from. It's probably just whatever else was going on with her. But what was lovely is he stayed 48 hours there, took care of her, spent time with her. And at one point he said, I just have to go home. I have to take a shower and I have to change my clothes. I just have to, because it's just getting uncomfortable. And so what he did was he got an iPad that David had bought for his mom, and he had asked her for her favorite hymns from the Baptist hymnal. And he recorded them and put them on the iPad. So Lee said, Lee is his brother, said, what? I just can't leave her here. There's no one to care for her. There's no one going to be by her side. So he got the iPad, turned on David playing the piano, and set it next to her ear when he left. And when he came back, she was gone.
Yeah.
And that was so warming to know that she didn't leave. Maybe a human wasn't there, but David's being was there, when she passed. So that was a wonderful memory of that passing.
If you don't mind talking about it, you two have lost your beloved dog as well. And I think I'd like to talk about it because I think there are people who feel like it's weird, or they feel guilty about mourning and grieving a beloved animal companion as much as a person. And yet these creatures of ours that we live with and live with us and share our lives in so many ways, they really are companions to us. And I think that grief is every bit as genuine and real. And that having a kind of vigil with our animals, I think many of us have probably done that. I sure have. And finding comfort. I remember when one of our really beloved elderly cats was hit and killed, and I was out in the street holding this animal, and Junko Harui, who owned the Bainbridge Gardens nursery at that time, pulled over and said, "I'll stay with you, but I need you to get out of the street." He got out of the street and we talked. I was saying, talking to him about it. And then my oldest, who had been in school in Seattle, appeared saying, "I knew something was wrong. I had to come home." And, we took our animal up into the garden. And when after school, the other kids came after, and we had a big burial, and they all, this was so beautiful to me. As they were crying, they put their tissues in with the kitty and put rosemary for remembrance. And they said, "We want her to take our tears with." And I thought, how beautiful is that? How real. And there are so many sweet ways we can honor our grief and not feel like it's something wrong or something we should get over, right?
Yeah.
Oh, sure, yeah. The visual that we had one.
So it's, I guess, in the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years, I'm not great on this subject, so I just hear things and it just stays with me, and then I hear other things. One of the things that I've heard is that when a person passes or a being passes, it's stay with them or whatever, stay with them. But then my question is, well, how long? And a lot of people will answer, well, stay as long as you think it's necessary. I'm like, well, I want a better answer. Well, there is no better answer. So it's like, okay, well, so we did this with our dog, JJ. We brought him we didn't know what to do. Here he is, he's dead and we're holding him. And so we just brought him into the music room, and Chris kind of says, well, what do we do now? And I go, I don't know. And so I just said, well, I think I want to, all I can do is play for him. If he's here in some way, as it's been said, don't leave the body after it's immediately passed because of some connection, then somehow you can maybe communicate. And so I just played for him, and we played, and because that was such a big part of JJ's life, was hearing, he knew every concerto in the world and every orchestral suite that in rehearsal that I was going to perform. He heard the rehearsals, and when people came over, he heard all this music. So I thought, oh, well, maybe that's a connection. And so we did that. And it gave us a lot of peace. It was just like, it just felt so, it felt so right. And then even as we buried him right outside the music room in our backyard, we decided, we didn't know how, I played a gazillion funerals, so I know how to do my part in a funeral is play music. So Chris says, what are we going to do? I said, well, we'll play. So we play. I had my violin, he had his recorder, and we put JJ down, and we played All Things Bright and Beautiful, in the rain. And all creatures great and small. And Barry had his bone, his lovely bone that he enjoyed, and his ball, his little tiny soccer ball. And it was good. It was really, I don't, maybe like Anne does, obviously you've done this and we did it, but it's not something you go out and talk about you don't know if other people are doing it or not. And so it was good. Anyway,
a couple of the things that happened after that Rick had mentioned, and also Don too, as far as that first story. Of course, there's an incredible loss, and you just reach out. You don't want to let him go. You start clearing stuff out because the memories are sad. But we have a little planting area right outside the front door. And we didn't plant the stuff in there. But right around when he passed,
like literally within 2 days, we had a heliobore come up. I mean, it was up, but that it had flowers. And there were 2 flowers together that were already greening, and another white flower came up, literally within 2 days of him dying. Him separate, and then the 2 of us here. Like, we're the green, and then here he was, this beautiful white flower. And the other thing is, I'm telling you, maybe it was just coincidence, but I don't think so. And the other thing that happened, we wanted to focus on happiness as much as possible. For some reason, outside of our den window, this junco showed up. And what we had done, we have a big picture window, and we had put up a trellis so that the birds wouldn't fly into the window. I'm telling you, every morning, he would pop onto the trellis, turn around, and flap his wings against the window. We would hear it every morning. Never was he around before when JJ was present. And we're like, so we named him JJ because that's who he was. His spirit was still there.
And then we would feed him.
We would feed him. We'd put some food out there. He'd come like, good morning. We're bringing the food out. Come on.
I'm ready for breakfast.
Just other ways, I think, that their spirit is not gone right away. Maybe that takes time. And maybe it's us processing that their spirit is gone. Maybe that's that whole. But anyway, that's our 2 cents. Thank you, Anne.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think, one of the things I love to do is talk about things that we're not supposed to talk about or that nobody will talk about, because I think opening that up makes us all freer to say, oh, I guess we can normalize that. We can admit that we grieve, or we can admit whatever it is. And I think it's refreshing. It's like letting fresh air in to something that's been sort of a closed topic for way too long. I know for my mom's generation, it was very hard to talk about emotions, really. So, much of us, those of us who flaunted our way through the 60s are much more comfortable with our emotions, right? But I think that is a healthy thing to sort of feel like there shouldn't be forbidden topics. We should be able to look together at anything that we need to talk about. Dawn, do you want to say something about like when families have that grief and feel like they shouldn't? Or, I mean, I've seen that sometimes, or survival guilt.
Sure. Actually, though, I think I'd rather ask one of the other participants here today to talk about their most recent experience with a death in their family. Is anyone willing to do that? Rita?
There was a young girl who's part of our extended family. It's my son-in-law's cousin's daughter is the cousin, and she's only 14 and she committed suicide. She was here on the island. And so it's hard. My grandson, who is 11, is her cousin as well. And so it's hard to know because you have to feel, first of all, the anger and the rage from the suicide. For someone so young, it is so hard. And I'm not sure if the family may be coming to our home for Thanksgiving. We have usually quite a large Thanksgiving gathering of different families. So I'm not sure what part, if that the actual mom and dad and the sibling, she had a younger sister 2 years younger, and then a younger brother about 7 years younger. if they're actually coming, but there are some other extended family members, I think, that are coming. So it's going to be a little tricky, I would say. Not tricky so that, but as you know, I don't know how they're feeling. I don't know how I'm feeling. And so it's probably the oldest one that's going to be here. How do we kind of set the tone? You know, I mean, how do we kind of navigate this? So it's really, really hard. It's really hard.
Have you thought of setting a place at the table for that person?
Yeah, I have, just as we were talking about this, but I don't know if everybody else who's coming is aware of what's happened. And I don't know if that actual family's there. And because I'm not, it's not my actual children, and I'm not the kind of head of that. I don't know, but I will have we've got a little bit of time to have some conversation. And I didn't, you know, I'm sorry, this is
I don't know.
it's hard.
It is.
Her name.
So Rita, even if you you mentioned you don't know if other people know about it, how that might affect them perhaps is a concern. If nothing else, perhaps there's some small thing you can do, put a picture somewhere where you can see it. Have a way for your own heart to remember this child during that time. And the other thing I'd say is in children's grief, children are better at grieving than adults are. But they do it in a different language. Often it's in play, it's in art, it's just talking with each other. So if there are children there, make sure that there's a room, and this is true of a formal remembrance as well. Make sure there's a place for the children to be children, to not have to listen to the adult ritual so much, or to get beyond that and have time with each other, because they will do remarkable things for each other. And that's not that they're being left on their own, but they're being allowed to communicate at the level where they're living. And it's those who've been through children's grief, taught children's grief, or serve in that area will all tell you a similar thing, that speak the truth to them, tell them what's really happening, but try to do it with language that's at their level, and then give them the room to just be with each other to do it. So if that helps, you take that away.
Patricia, I think you wanted to add something. Or
Oh, I was going to comment on survivor's guilt. I don't know anyone here, so they may not know my situation. My daughter died earlier this year, and prior to that, about 5 years before, my youngest daughter died of ovarian cancer. So Liza and I were very close, and it was very unexpected, where we texted and talked every day. We shopped together. We did everything together after her sister died. And when she got COVID in January, she wouldn't let me come over and see her. We texted, but she wouldn't let me see her. And she wouldn't let me come over. She wouldn't let anyone in her house. She said she was going to do fine and I should just drop off groceries at her front door, which I was doing. And then a couple of weeks in, she didn't respond to my texts. And I went over and she didn't answer the door. So, I called 911 and they found her unresponsive inside. And, it's such a shock for something like that. I really wish that she had let me at least see her before she left me for good. But I don't want to blame her, but leaving someone behind without letting them see you. She said her hair was too messy and her house was too messy and she just couldn't let me in. But, when one of your children dies and you're not there for them, there is a lot of survivor's guilt. I think I'm doing well with it now. I understand that people have a right to die as they want to die. She didn't want me to see her dying. And I have to respect that. And I'm trying to do that. But there's all kinds of survivor's guilt, I think, out there with people, especially mothers who feel they should look after their children. But to have both my daughters gone and the holidays coming up, that's really tough. But I'm going to make a small Thanksgiving dinner, as Liza and I shared last year without her sister. And, I'll try and honor her that way. In other words, continue on as she would have wanted me to, or she would have had she been here. And I don't blame her anymore at all. I know she did the best she could and she tried to stay there. But anyway, that's just I just wanted to say that, survivor's guilt, when her sister died of ovarian cancer, I had 3 years to think about that. And still, I did not have her funeral planned. I did not expect her to die. I didn't have any vision of what I would do after she was gone. So that was shocking to me. But then to have my second daughter die, obviously, I had nothing planned. And thank God, other people got it together and we did something. We had to wait for her. So that was nice. But survivor's guilt is a real thing. And it is really, you have to get through that as much as you have to get through the grief of not having that person around anymore to sharing, what your life used to be. And I think you have to forgive yourself and accept that that's the way they wanted it. So that's what I'm doing. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say was survivor's guilt is as difficult as grief, I guess.
Patricia, we have three empty places at our Thanksgiving table, and you'd be a most welcome guest.
Thank you, Reed. That's a nice invite. My cat even woke up with that. I probably won't go out for Thanksgiving. I really don't go out much anymore. Go shopping, that's about it. So I'll probably turn that down. But you can set a place for Liza.
If you decide even at the last minute, we would welcome you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
wanted to ask Don or Rick, do you, we're always talking about a loss, meaning that the person is gone, but what if they still exist, but for all intents and purposes, they're dead to you? Is that just the same or is it different?
Don, you want to take that?
I'll leave it for you if you would.
So it's my mother.
And what is your perception?
I think after 20 years, I've really gone through all of the stages, the anger, the grief, remorse, what if it was different, that kind of thing. And I can guarantee from her, all the letters that came, they came in all of the stages of grief as well. But I just was curious as out there. I mean, when you learn about helping people deal with that type of sort of cold separation, if it's the same as a death.
Yeah. In science has some concept of life, that everything is energy and nothing is ever lost. And many times people refer that to just the natural world, just the physical things we see around us. The leaves fall in autumn, they decay, they become part of the soil. The nutrition from that matter goes up the roots of the trees and feeds them, and so the cycle continues over and over again. And one way to consider life of the human, the spirit, if you will, might be something similar, that nothing's ever lost, it's only ever changed, and that it's everything it's ever been still exists today, but exists in different form. And for some people, it's so that the ones that we've known as our loved ones live on, but in a different form than here. And so that's one way to consider that you've never lost them and you never will. But there's a different thing that you have to consider, and that is from the human perspective, the sense of I'm still here, they're not, and I'm still going through this journey and they're not. So in a way, they seem so remote from us. But it's and for every person, it's just unique. It's just different. For me, it's so that the spirit lives on, and all the people I've ever loved, even casual people that I never got close to, but I felt love for them, that love still lives in me. And I think of it every day. People come to mind, and I just sort of energize that love in my heart that I'm feeling for them. And to me, that keeps that means they are alive somewhere, and I've never lost touch with them. Does that begin to answer the question you posed?
I think more it was, I was interested in the differences between a physical loss and an emotional loss. I do agree. I mean, that, I can't erase the time, that the good times and the love. I mean, it's still there, but as you do with grief, you process it, and it becomes something that you don't focus on 24/7, 365.
Right.
It's the only way to survive. If you're living and just
right.
that's all you do,
So that was my point is,
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
spirit, there's no difference, but I was just
Yeah.
curious as how it may be different.
Yeah. Yeah, the physical loss, I think in time, one of the stages, Kubler-Ross's description of the stages of grief, one of the stages is denial. And it takes a while to admit that that person's really gone. And in that sense, there can come a time of reconciliation with yourself when we can admit that that person truly is gone, because there's part of us that wants to deny that for a period of time. And the emotional side of that can live on, even though we admit that they're gone. And you know, it's a process. As in leading grief groups over time, I came to realize that, as I said to you the other day, that the measure of our grief is a measure of our love that we have inside for our relation to a person, a place, a circumstance. And that grief never ever goes away because love never dies. It changes expression, we change our relationship to it, but it is eternal. It's the one thing that's eternal in my experience of life. And so we come to reconcile certain aspects of the event, like that the physical body is gone, but the emotional part is, on some level, to some degree, I believe will forever be a part of us.
We're pretty much running out of time here. I want to thank everybody who participated, everyone who shared their thoughts and listened to the conversation. And we will certainly visit it again, because it's one of those experiences we're all going to share many times in our lives, right?
Yeah.
So thank you.